Good afternoon, good afternoon, good afternoon, family, and welcome. I want to say welcome first to our Rayak family who is co-sponsoring today's TCR Dialogues. Good afternoon, and welcome to all of our followers of the Christian Recorder, the Connectional family, and all our ecumenical friends and all the friends from all over. Amen. We are grateful for your joining us across platforms. And we invite you to hit us up in the chat boxes and in the comment sections, meet each other virtually and engage with one another. And what I hope will be a communal dialogue. We want to make sure that you all are building relationship in the chat boxes while we are talking, building community in the chat box. If you are AME, especially y'all, especially family, please feel free to drop your district and your church in the chat box so that we know where you're coming from and who all is tuned in to TCR Dialogues today. With all of that being said, I'm Reverend Jasmine Brooks, news editor for the Christian Recorder, and I am excited about our continued celebration of Women's History Month. Today, we're going to hear from the Reverend Candice. And Reverend, as in a name deserving of reverence, Reverend Candice Benbow, author of Lip Theology. Candice is a multi-genre theologian who situates her work at the intersections of beauty, faith, feminism, and culture with the intention of giving voice to Black women's shared experiences of healing and journeying toward wholeness. Reimagining how faith can be a tool of liberation and transformation for women and girls. She challenges Black women to think critically about how they see God and the world. Candice is a very accomplished scholar. She has been named by Sojourners as one of 10 Christian women shaping the church in 2020. Candice has also written for various outlets, including Essence Magazine, Glamour Magazine, The Root, Vice, Shondaland, Madame Noir, and the Me Too movement. So she's somebody. Not that she wasn't without all of those accreditations, but she is certainly somebody. In May 2016, following the release of Beyonce's visual album Lemonade, Candice created the Lemonade Syllabus hashtag and social media campaign. She's a member of Alpha Kappa Alpha Sorority Incorporated, and she holds degrees from Tennessee State University, North Carolina Central University, and Duke Divinity School. So she is a studied scholar and theologian. She calls Atlanta home, where she resides with her precious baby, Charlie, her beagle.
Yes.
Candice, welcome, welcome, welcome to you.
Thank you so much for having me. I'm really excited about this conversation. Congratulations to you, ordination, editor, all of those things. So I'm really excited about our chat today.
Thank you. I appreciate it. And thank you for joining us. So I have read your book and I am impressed. I am
Thank you.
impressed with
Thank
the authenticity of your writing and the ways that you allowed your story to be a theological assertion. It's a very approachable text, sort of like a theological memoir, which I appreciated. So, if you don't mind, can you talk to us a little bit about how you decided that your story needed to be the subject of your theological assertions? What brought you to that place?
First, thank you. What was the catalyst for me was that I believe that Black women really owe it to themselves to use their life as kind of this guide of how we can, one, understand God even more deeply and understand the world. And so I was like, how do I model that without, telling my story? And I just don't think that you can do that. The the theological or spiritual autobiographies, the theological memoirs that were so formational for me were women who lifted up their life as text and talked about their journey not only with God but with themselves, and in doing so really pushed the reader and invited the reader to see how they could do the same in their life, to one, recognize growth recognize growing edges, recognize God's presence, and recognize who they needed to be in the world, and who they already were in the world and are in the world. And so when it came time to write Lip Theology, that was the same format and desire that I had.
Okay. Well, thank you for sharing. I one thing that came to mind as you were talking about the importance of spiritual memoirs or spiritual theologies and storytelling is that old saying, "I would rather see a sermon than hear one any day."
Any day.
The same thing for biblical text and sacred text. Our stories and our lives can be sacred text, and a large part of where that adage comes from is a matter of relationship. How do we share the gospel by way of our relationships? And so with that being said, you begin in your relationship with the Black church, and particularly the patriarchy that you name in that space.
Yeah, I mean, as one, I was context in a very interesting experience, right? My mom, both my mother and my father were in the same church and single, and my mother became pregnant, and my mother was held accountable, or was to be held accountable for that, for being pregnant with me, and she was supposed to apologize for being pregnant with me, and she would not. And so I was kind of, I say I was raised in this like vortex of faith and feminism, where my mother uh, reinforced her agency as a woman, her belief in equity and inclusion and equality. But she also raised me in a church context, because raising a girl alone, a daughter alone in the 80s and 90s, she believed that that would be the safest place for me. And that she could protect me from whatever was going on out there in church, as well as the ways that she was rearing me. I had to talk about the patriarchy and the sexism that takes place in Black church context, because so much of what a lot of us experience there as girls and as women is context in that, right? That like there's a certain level of movement, there's a certain level of matriculation and maneuvering and navigation in Black church space that is dripping with sexism, patriarchy, and as a daughter whose literal birth, whose literal existence was context in that, and impacted by that, and who grew up hearing sermons, and experiencing some very difficult encounters that did something to my self-esteem and how I recognize myself as a child of God, and how I recognize myself as being wanted. Um, I could not write a book that did not speak to that reality for myself and for so many other women. Too often, we like to ignore or dismiss or very quickly brush over that the ways that people are treated in church deeply impacts them. And I just didn't want to do that. Like I don't think that anyone is served by us being dishonest about the ways Black girls, the ways that young Black girls, and then the ways that Black women are engaged and encountered and formed in Black church spaces.
Right.
I'm just not. I wasn't gonna do that. So it was important for me to name it.
Yeah. Well, thank you for sharing that. This, I think, what you just shared speaks a little bit to the intimacy that we're led into in your book, and the ways that level of intimacy creates a new gospel to a certain extent. And so, for those of you who are watching and have not purchased it yet and appreciated what you have just heard, read Lip Theology, you can take a deeper dive into some of that story and how she was able to navigate that space. If you just pick up the text. It'll also be in the chat box for those of you who are looking for a link. So thank you so much, Candice, for sharing those things. And as you talk about the ways that the Black church and what you experienced there as a Black girl and what you witnessed there in terms of the experience of your mother, a Black woman, you talk a lot about the patriarchy and those experiences. And so I want to kind of switch directions a little bit, switch gears a little bit from the Black church to the Black community and the Black family, because understanding that the Black church is a single part of our community and in many ways a reflection of our families that make up the institution. How do you challenge the patriarchy that you name and you're leaving the church that exists also within the Black community and the Black family?
You have to call it out, right? Like we have to you have to hold systems and people that you love accountable, right? Like, it's really interesting because I was having this conversation with someone else who around the same moment was like, or around the same topic was like, oh my God, like how do you navigate being so antagonistic? And I was like, it's very interesting that that's the word that you would choose, because if I was calling out racism,
Okay.
holding
Okay.
white people to account, I would be prophetic and I would be courageous, right? But when you hold Black people, and particularly Black men, to account for the harms that they cause, you're antagonistic and you're combative, right? And like my my concern is always, what about the sisters, what about the children who don't say anything, right? Like I got in trouble because I was always gonna say something. Like I was always gonna say something. But there were some who they don't say anything. And then they hold it in and they carry a certain level of shame and a certain level of guilt and grief that is not theirs, right? Like it's not just the church that people are leaving, to your point about the ways that that is one part of our community, right? Like there are people, when you look on social media, who don't even want to be around their family
Mhm.
because because members of their family have ascribed to a specific kind of reality, and they have not made room for the existence of other realities, or even push themselves to make space for love, right? That, like, even if I don't get it all, even if I can't make sense of it all, I still love you and I still want to be in community with you, and I'll figure it out because you matter that much to me, right? There are so many people who do not hear that. And because of it, I see it all the time. I'm pretty sure you see it on social media. Like folks grieve the fact that they don't go to cookouts. They don't go home for Thanksgiving. They don't go home for Christmas, because we've not yet found ways to fully walk away from the ways that sexism, patriarchy, and heteronormativity inform our belief systems, to the point that they really push us to devalue the very people that we're called to walk the closest with. You know
Mhm.
what I'm saying? Like these are not like, your family ain't a suggestion. You know what I'm saying? Like I remember one time my mom was like, these are not, because I was talking about my cousins at one point and how they get on my nerves. And I was like, Mama, please, like, do not make me go over there because they don't like me. I don't like them. And she was like, yeah, but they don't have an asterisk. She was like, they're not suggested. Like, they are your bloodline. And for some purpose and reason, God allowed y'all to be kin. and related. So you're going to figure it out because we're going to your grandma's house and I ain't trying to whoop you today. So figure it out. You know what I'm saying? But like there's something to what does it mean for us to look at systems that we have held dear for so long and admit that maybe I'm not supposed to hold to this ideology more than I hold to the hand of my brother, my sister, my cousin, my neighbor.
My
Like,
God.
like, why am I holding on to this more than I'm holding on to them? Like, I want us, and part of that is why I wrote Lip Theology. That's why I write the way that I do. That's why it is, if you want to say that it's confrontational, it has to be that confrontational. Because as my preaching professor, Dean Luke Powery said, the preaching is a matter of life and death, right? And even though I say I preach in print, like I'm doing this work, this is a matter of life and death for people who are trying to make sense of what life is supposed to look like for them.
Yeah. Well, thank you for sharing. There are a couple things that you shared that I want us to tap back into right after we take this very brief commercial break. So hold those thoughts about systems and sexism and patriarchy, and we'll come right back to it after this break.
We're not braggers at Paul Quinn College. If I were going to brag, I'd have to talk to you about what we've done the last 15 months. I'd have to tell you about how we finished the first 2 new buildings on our campus in the last 50 years. I'd probably have to tell you about the 4 new academic disciplines that we've added. The banking and finance major, whose goal is to make sure all our students graduate economically sustainable. I'd probably have to talk to you about the Dallas Mavericks major that we created. Might even have to tell you about the Lowe's retail management major. I might even have to brag a little bit about how we formed a partnership with Bishop T.D. Jakes and created the Bishop T.D. Jakes Executive MBA program. But bragging is so distasteful. I mean, I'd rather just tell you about the partnership we struck with the Dallas Independent School District and KIPP Charter Network to open up 2 brand new schools on our campus this fall. One is going to be the Dr. Frederick Douglass Haynes III Global Academy at Paul Quinn College, which will be an international baccalaureate school. The other is the KIPP Oak Cliff School, which is going to be pre-K through 12. Those are things that we're really excited about. I guess we could tell you about all the infrastructure improvements that we made, the new roads, the new signs, how we cleared out a whole section of the campus to create the first ever Quinite walking trail, a 1.5-mile loop that will give people sort of peace of mind as they walk through. We could talk about the fact that the new buildings are a new residence hall that has room for 135 incredibly and gifted students. We could talk about the fact that we have a brand new athletic facility that seats 1,200 students, that has a state-of-the-art weight room or the dance studio or the classroom. We could talk about all of that, but why don't we just talk about what really, really matters? We are your school, and we are just warming up.
All right, welcome back. So I want to tap back into the piece of systemic sexism and patriarchy that you mentioned in your response to the last question. And I think you rightly named sexism and patriarchy as systems that we encounter within our familial and religious institutions. And many will argue that those systems are an extension of the oppression that all of us experience, male, female, non-binary alike, within our community, and that none of us are unscathed by those systems. And so we either intentionally or unintentionally perpetuate them, right? So how does Red Lip Theology respond to that assertion?
One of the things that I really tried to do and model in Red Lip Theology is a kind of gracious accountability, right? Like, so I could not hold the church accountable and hold systems accountable if I was also not honest about the ways that I embodied some of them, right? If I was also not honest about the ways that brokenness and a certain level of insecurity, a certain level of fear made, and not made, but led me to react and respond in certain ways and to do things in certain situations. And so on that level, right, we have to be very honest about how how these systems we do embody them, right? And then we have to be very honest about the fact that that embodiment is not to death, right? That like we are not tethered to systems and to ideologies that we cannot also walk away from, right? And Red Lip Theology, one, holds all of us to realities that we can be harmful, whether intentionally or unintentionally. But it also pushes us to realize that if we are willing to do the work, we may not we can't undo harm, right? But we can work to be safer than we have been. And I think that that is not only should be the call or the push for us as Black folk, but it ought to be the call and the push for us as Christians, right? That like, what does it look like for we always talk about I ain't who I used to be, right? Like we can shout off that all day. But literally what does that mean that I am not who I used to be? Like how have you become safer, ethical space and a person that can be endeared to other people? What does that look like?
Yeah. Yeah. Okay. Thank you for sharing. So I'm going to switch gears because I think that anybody who wants to understand more about your perspective on sexism and patriarchy can certainly find it in the book. So I'm going to switch gears a little bit. And you can correct me if I'm wrong here, but as I understand it, you name seminary as the place that your theology took shape in a real way. Can you share? I'm sorry.
No, go ahead. Go ahead.
Can you share how you came upon seminary in the first place? Considering your views of God and religiosity were already taking shape by way of your parental, church, and romantic relationships. How did you come upon seminary with consideration for how your theology was already being shaped?
I'm gonna tell the truth. I knew I was supposed to go to seminary a long time ago. I was in college and I was searching divinity schools and seminaries and looking up theological grad programs. I knew I was called to not to preach, but I knew that I was called to a certain kind of public theological work, even if I didn't know what that meant.
Mm-hmm.
And even if I hadn't seen it really, right? But then I'll tell you the truth, like I was like, ooh, like if I go to seminary, I go to divinity school, like it's a whole kind of like life that I legitimately gotta live. And I don't know if I want to do that. But no, more to honesty. I ran like I think everyone does when they know that they have a call that is deep, a call that tugs, right? That like I think that there's something I've never been called to preach, but when I talk to my friends who wrestled with their call to ministry and wrestled with their call to preach, it felt the same. Like that I knew that there was something that was bigger than me that I was being called to that also scared me. that also that also lingered even when I tried to walk away from it. And so the way that I negotiated this is the funny part. I had negotiated with myself and agreed with myself and just knew that God was just gonna deal with it, right? That like I was getting a master's in sociology and I was gonna do sociology of religion. And then I was gonna study the sociological impact of the Black church. Boom, I'm good. I gotta go somewhere. Right. And so I'm in my program and I'm doing my thesis, I'm writing my papers, I'm meeting with my professor, and my professor says to me, "Your questions are sociological in nature for sure, but they also are deeply theological." And I was like, is this am I Jonah and am I in the belly of the whale? You know what I'm saying? Like, and he was like, "I really think that you should consider seminary." I was like, no, I'm good. Like, let's just go this route, right? And then it still tugged. And then Whitney Houston died. And when Whitney died, for me, while it may not have done this for anybody else, for me, it was a moment of a very existential crisis for me. Like, she was the quintessential church girl to me. Like, that's literally how we were presented. Like, they showed us all of the footage of her singing in church. When she sang, whatever she sang, you felt the Holy Ghost. Like, you knew that she was anointed. You knew that God was on her life. And yet, as she struggled and stumbled, there was something about a lot of her public falls and a lot of her public stumbling that had so much to do with the desire and the need or the belief to feel like you had to keep up this persona, right? And that, that she couldn't literally truly be herself, that she couldn't be, that she couldn't ever feel comfortable in her own skin. Since she has, since her passing and her transition, more people have come out who are closer to her to talk about some of those struggles, right? And some of the ways that the church and religion were not kind to her as she was trying to navigate what it meant to live in her truth. And I remember feeling like, if it don't work for her, what about the rest of us? Like, that literally was a moment that I had. And I think Michael's funeral was the first funeral I ever remember seeing on television. But Whitney's funeral, my mama, me, and my grandma were at my grandmother's house. We dressed up for the funeral and we watched it on live stream. And I remember immediately after her funeral, the day after her funeral, I wrote my entrance essay to seminary because I couldn't run anymore. Mm-hmm. That there were some theological questions that I had for God about God's relationship with Black women that I needed those 3 years to sit through and study. I needed time to really delve into theology itself and figure some things out.
Yeah. So I heard you talking about that piece of being able to live in your truth and live in your authenticity that Whitney Houston's transition spoke to for you. And I also heard you say, if I go to seminary, there is a certain life I have to live. Mm-hmm. Right? What does that life look like? And are you living the life that you expected you'd have to if you went to seminary, with consideration for this battling with authenticity, or this chase after authenticity and truth that you mentioned?
Yeah, I felt like, to be honest, like I literally was like, oh my gosh, if I go to seminary, I got to go back to like when I threw out all my CDs and was just driving around in undergrad listening to Fred Hammond's Pages of Life. And like not and feeling like, again, that there was a certain level of a certain veil, right, that I had to put over myself and a certain presentation of myself that I believed that you had to have in order to be in quote unquote ministry. The other piece to that was I had not seen anybody who was doing what I felt like God was calling me to do, right? That like the women who my mother was reading, like she was reading. I grew up seeing my mother read Juanita Weems's books. But she's also a preacher, right? Like the women that I saw, I grew up at a time where it was not unheard of for women to preach, right? Like I am a daughter of women that are loose. I remember No More Sheets, right? Like I remember and as much as I adored them, as much as I was raised on women preachers, I knew that that was not who God had called me to be. And so some of my angst and hesitation around seminary and around divinity school was because I didn't know what else that was for me, right? That like I'm not a preacher. I guess I'll teach, but even teaching and though I was, before my mama passed, like that was really what my life was moving towards. But a lot of my angst and anxiety around seminary was because I didn't have models of what I knew God was calling me to do. And that I felt like at the time I was in undergrad. I felt like at the time, if I go to seminary, I'm just going to be a preacher. And I don't want to preach. I don't want to consecrate and not do all the stuff that preachers got to do. Like, I don't want to do that. And so when before I got to seminary, but once I got to Duke, I was really able to become much more comfortable with calling myself a writer and knowing that I had been called to write and what that looked like. You know what I'm saying? Like that was who I was and who God had called me to be as a writer, and to move into that space. So in so many ways, seminary pushed me to not only explore authenticity, but seminary also gave me room to rest in who God called me to be. Like that was the time I was like, I'm a writer. Like I'm called to words. You know what I'm saying? I knew before, like I was writing books when I was a little girl. Like my mama took my first book and made copies at Kinko's and sold them at church and at her job for $7, right? Like, and you couldn't tell me nothing when I had some money to go to the mall. Like I was rich, right? But I knew that I was called to words. I knew that I was called to write sentences that made people think about who God is and who they are because they know God. Mm-hmm. So seminary gave me that level of comfort. I am grateful, deeply grateful for that, because, and I'll say this for anybody that's watching or who will watch that may be in seminary and is struggling with like, I don't know, like what I'm not called to preach, or who they may even thinking about seminary. Like I'm not called to preach. I don't know what this looks like. Like I am grateful that I stopped running and said yes to it, because it really was part of the call. Like I can't do what I do not having gone that way, right? And so it gave me room to say like, no, I don't have to present a certain way. I just got to be real. Like God called me in the fullness of who I am to do this work, right? You know what I'm saying? It does not mean that I don't have to be held accountable for the ways that I need to show up and be better. And because we all have growing edges, but God knew who God called, right? Like God knows who I am, right? And that did not scare God when God called me. So it shouldn't scare me when I live into the fullness of that call.
Yeah. I want this moment to serve as a testament to everybody who's listening that your theology and your religiosity does not have to be something that binds you up and boxes you in.
Yeah.
That when the word says where the Spirit of the Lord is, there is freedom. That means in every way, in
Yeah.
every part of our lives. And so I'm grateful for your testimony. And I hope that somebody walks away from this moment being reminded that it is okay to be exactly who you are.
Yeah.
It's okay to live in the fullness of your authenticity, that God called you, chose you, can use you, can walk with you, is wanting to journey with you just as you are, because the God who created you already knew who God was creating, right? So
Exactly.
for that testimony, I hope that it blesses somebody who's on the call. Amen. What a word. This is what we mean when we say, I'd rather see a sermon than hear one any day. Our lives are testaments to the power of God. And so thank you for sharing how God moved in and on you in a way that can be a blessing to those of us who are listening and witnessing.
Thank you.
We are going to take another moment for just a quick commercial break. And when we come back, we'll switch gears just one more time and delve into the book a little bit. So I hope those of you who are listening and have already purchased the book have your book right next to you so you can read along when we pull this book up. All right. Right after this commercial break.
The AME Church Publishing House provides a diverse array of products to meet the worship and Bible study needs of believers of all ages. Our church school materials, hymnal, and book of worship are available in print as well as digitally through Amazon.com. Our premier product is the Liberating Faith Studies Church School Curriculum Weekly. We host an interactive virtual connectional church school. Free digital worship resources are available on imame.org to help you observe the Christian calendar and special days. We look forward to your virtual visit to amecpublishing.com and welcoming you in person at our new headquarters in Nashville in spring 2022.
All right. So picking up the book on page 166. For those of you who are on the call, we're in second paragraph, in the middle of the second paragraph. And I'm just going to read a few lines so that everybody knows what we're talking about. On page 166. And it's actually the last paragraph, sorry. Mm-hmm. As Black women, we have to settle into more loving and freeing thoughts. Oh, you know what? I'm reading the wrong page. It is page 56.
Okay.
56. And it says, whatever we choose, I believe God becomes what we need in relationship to the decision made. I've begun to favor the notion that there are implications to our choices rather than to frame decisions with the inherently negative connotation of consequences. Good and bad choices have implications. All right. I want to focus on the first sentence. Whatever we choose, I believe God becomes what we need in relationship to the decision made. Mm-hmm. What do you mean by this? What do you mean by this? This idea that God becomes whatever we need?
Yeah, I mean, I think that there are times where in decisions we have done something that may have been deeply wounding or horrible to us or to someone else, and God meets us in that mess. I think that sometimes there are instances where we have done work, we have made a decision, we made a choice that empowers us And we may need to rise to the occasion to be better. And God equips and strengthens us, right? Like, I have long believed that whatever we need, because that's what I learned in church. Whatever you need, God's got it. Like, whoever you need God to be for you, God is. And I think one of the most important parts for me has been honoring that even as I make decisions, even as I make choices for my life, even as we all do that, we are never without God's love, God's grace, and God's presence. And so even when I make an inherently negative decision or a wrong choice, like, even in correction, God's grace and God's love is there, right? So like, whatever we need, God equips us with in the midst of that, in the midst of those decisions and choices.
So I feel like that thought that you have shared is sort of an extension of another thought that you share in the book about our inherent goodness, or what I perceive to be inherent goodness. You don't use that exact language, but that's how I read it. And that's on page 166, the page that I went to by accident first, right?
Okay.
Page 166, that last paragraph. And I'm going to read it for those who are listening so that they know where we are and what we're talking about. As Black women, we have to settle into more loving and freeing thoughts. So many books, conferences, podcasts, and sermons are rooted in the idea that we are not already good and must become good. That is not the truth of who we are. We are already good. There may be ways we don't lean into our goodness. Social and structural forces and our own fear can often dim the light of living into our goodness. Settling into yourself creates the opportunity to see yourself with grace and possibility. I want to know, Sister Candice, is this goodness that you're talking about inherent with all of humanity, or is it reserved for the most marginal of creation? What theological claim are you making about goodness as an inherent trait? Are we to see the good of humanity and divinity through the being of Black women? Is that the assertion you're making? Can help me to unpack the assertion that you're making about the inherent goodness of either marginal beings or all of creation?
All of creation is good. Like when God created it, creation, God said it was good. It is good. The truth is that, and I walked through it in an earlier chapter. There's so much that pushes us as Black women to believe that we are not, right? Like I talk about in the book, I think it's in the essay "We Are Good Creation," where I talk about there's so much that pushes us to believe that we are not inherently good, right? That too often we start our encounter with God at the fall. Like, that ain't even where the Bible starts, right? So like, if God does not start the narrative of God's relationship with creation with the fall or with sin, why do we start our relationship with God there, right? Like, that there is, and the arc of scripture, the biblical narrative supports the fact that even when God has been the most frustrated with creation, particularly humanity, because that part we can do the most, God would always remind us, I've loved you with that everlasting love, right? That like the entire arc of scripture is about the fact that we are deeply loved and we never lost our goodness, right? And so that part in the book is about me pushing us as sisters to never lose that, because there's so much in the world that will make us believe that, oh, like, I mean, you can scroll your timeline and it is some dude with a microphone, whether he's preaching or whether he's in a podcast, that is talking about or talking to women in some of the most derogatory and negative ways. That, like, I was watching a clip from a sermon the other day, and dude was like, y'all take your hair off and show him who you really are. Tell him it's a wig. This ain't my hair. And I was like, dude, shut up. Like, you know what I'm saying? Like, that it is not even like the ways that we are pushed to believe, oh, if I just lose these 15 pounds, right? Oh, if I can just, I need to sow more, and then God is gonna bless me with this. I need to, fast more, and then my husband gonna come. All of the ways that we are pushed to believe that we have to do something in order to be seen as worthy, in order to be seen as good. That's not how God sees us. And if that's not how God sees us, then that's not how we need to see ourselves. And if we shift how we see ourselves, I guarantee you that there will be a shift in, it doesn't necessarily mean that the world will shift, because I think that too many systems are dependent upon not caring for us in the ways that they need to. But it doesn't mean that if we shift, those systems will shift. But what it does mean is that if we shift how we think about ourselves and see ourselves, then we shift who we engage with, right? We shift how we engage in those systems. We shift how we engage with those individuals who may think, who do not think of us in loving ways. And that matters more than anything that matters.
Mm-hmm. So I think some of the things that you touched on in your answer to that question kind of bring us full circle in the conversation. It brings us back to the systems and structures that we began with talking about, and the fact that you named in your book and in many of your other conversations how you have disconnected yourself from the Black church for some of these reasons that you have just named, but also remained in a particular Black church. So can you share with us what it means for you to free yourself from a church or religion that you are, to a degree, still a part of, and what onus do you believe Black women have in helping to reshape what it is? And this will be our last full question.
Yeah, so in the essay Leaving Church, because I want to be I want to be clear. I let go of harmful theologies and things that did not speak to and bring life to my spirit. And even the subtitle is about sisters who we will tie up to the beauty supply store or brunch or somewhere else that will be life-giving to our spirit, because churches refuse to honor that there needs to be work around dismantling harmful theologies. That being said, what I do lift and what's important about Lip Theology is that there are some of us who have walked away from harmful theologies and still found home in certain specific church spaces. Like, I'm born and raised in the Black Baptist church, right? My mama felt me kick inside of her in a church. And that was when she knew that God always was going to have us. So on some level, I can't leave the church if I wanted to. I had, and for reasons that were necessary, I took some space and walked away. But what I think is also important was that I had to be very honest about all of the things that go into my spirituality. Like, my faith and my spirituality are rooted in the teachings of Jesus, the wisdom of my ancestors, and the power of Black womanhood. And when I gave myself permission to honor that, when I gave myself permission to be to embrace all of the ways that I found spirit, all of the ways that God has moved with me, it gave me the courage to say, I don't just find that in church, right? Like church is an aspect of that. It's not the totality. I do believe, and I will make an argument for this. I don't think that if you are a free thinking Black woman, I don't think that the church can hold or does hold the totality of your spiritual development and your spiritual formation, because of the ways that church doctrine and Black church theologies and Black church structures don't welcome and don't embrace free thinking Black women, right? Like there's a reason why I don't want to be ordained, right? Aside from that, that's not something that I felt led or to do, but there's a reason why the work that I do is not connected to a particular institution or church, right? Even as I am still affiliated with the church, because I don't need a pastor coming and telling me don't talk about that, right? And the only reason I'm telling you not to talk about it is because I'm a woman, or trying to massage or contour parts of Red Lip Theology to make it safer and to make it not push against patriarchal forces and sexism, because that happens entirely too much to us in church spaces. And so there is a part that says, yeah, like there are some who have walked away and they won't come back. And then there are some like me who, I'm here, y'all don't have to deal with it. I'm not going nowhere because I love the church and I want it to be well. And I will hold it to account because it needs to be held to account. And at that same token, it's not the totality of the ways that I encounter God and feel by the Spirit.
Well, thank you so much for all that you have shared in time, in energy, and in wisdom. We appreciate you. We appreciate you. And I want to give you space to share with the folk what is next for you, anything that we need to be tapped into, anything that we need to be following you on, any projects or anything you have coming up. Just share with us what's next for you before we close out.
So what's next? I'm really grateful because I'm the lead consultant on a 2-day global virtual convening on faith and gender equality that's happening at the end of this month. That's sponsored by the Brookings Institute, the Rockefeller Foundation, and the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation. I can't with a couple of folks came up with this really dope idea and they were like, let's do it. And so really excited about that. And I've started doing some work on book 2, which don't have a date yet for when that's out or will be out, because I'm still very much in the beginning stages of writing about it, which is it'll be about love and relationships and talking about that from a Black woman's perspective, because we get a lot of books about love and relationships from Black men, and I'm tired of hearing from them. And so just a lot of writing and getting really and settling into what it looks like for us to have conversations with each other as sisters about faith and about our own formations in this public arena. So I'm really excited, grateful for this opportunity. Thank you guys so much for having me. I'm gonna say really quick, she said she was gonna watch Reverend Jessica Ingram who is a mentor of mine, who told me, she was like, now if you talk crazy, do not tell them that you know me. So hopefully I made her proud and did not embarrass her too much. But I love her dearly, and just I'm grateful for her. So I think she's watching, so I wanted to shout her out.
All right. So she let you know in the chat box, I am listening to you.
Oh, she did? Okay, hey.
She was funny. That means you did good. You didn't embarrass her.
Good.
Right. All right, fam. Well, y'all heard it from Candice where she's headed. So be sure to follow her projects and public engagement so that you can get your daily dose of red lip theology. All right. If you haven't already, be sure to pick up the book. Red Lip Theology. The link to that will be in the comment section on all platforms. You can also visit her website to find a link to pick up the book. As we are headed out, I want to give a special shout out and thank you to John Thomas, the chief editor of the Christian Recorder, who is behind the scenes pulling everything together. We appreciate you and all of your work. I also want to give a special shout out and thank you to Martinique Mix, the Connectional RAYAC president, who is co-sponsoring this event. Thank you so much for all of your time and all of your efforts that made this afternoon possible. And lastly, but especially not least, I say a very special thank you to all of you who are listening across the platforms. I hope that you have heard something that moved you, that changed you, that put you on fire, set your soul on fire, so that you can help move us a little closer to justice, help move us a little closer to equity within our churches, within our communities, and within our familial structures as it relates to the experiences of Black women and girls who I know we all have in our circles. All right. So thank you all so much for joining. And we hope to see you all again on another session of TCR Dialogues. Peace, everyone.